The alert came at the worst possible time. Grand Admiral Sarath Khan was in the middle of a formal dinner with three senators and the High Commander of the Western Fleet when his personal communicator buzzed against his wrist. He ignored it the first time. He ignored it the second time. When it buzzed a third time in less than a minute, he excused himself from the table, stepped out onto the wide stone balcony of the Imperial Palace, and answered it. The voice on the other end belonged to his night watch officer, a young male named Corvin, and the voice was shaking. That was the first sign something was very wrong. Corvin had been working the night desk for 11 years. Sarath Khan had never heard him shake before. "Admiral," Corvin said, "we have lost contact with Border Patrol Cruiser 794. Last known position, the Outer Vale sector. The final transmission came in 12 minutes ago. Sir, you need to see what they sent." Sarath Khan stood on the balcony and looked out over the lights of Velkara. The throne world of the Dominion Empire stretched out before him in every direction. Towers of white stone and blue glass reaching up into the night sky, the glow of 10 million lights reflecting off low clouds, the distant hum of the city that never truly slept. It was the most powerful planet in 14,000 star systems. It had not been threatened in 600 years. "Send it to my personal screen," he said. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. He was there in 12. The Imperial Fleet Command Center sat deep beneath the palace, carved into the bedrock of the planet itself. It was a vast circular room filled with holographic displays, rows of analysts at their stations, and the quiet, constant noise of data flowing in from every corner of the Dominion's territory. Sarath Khan had spent more of his life in this room than anywhere else. He knew every light on every panel. He knew the difference between a normal alert and a serious one just from the color of the indicators. Tonight, the indicators were a color he had not seen in a very long time. Red, deep, solid red. Not the flashing red of a minor emergency, the steady red of something that had already happened and could not be undone. Corvin met him at the door and led him directly to the central display without saying a word. The other analysts at their stations were quiet. Not too quiet. They were all watching him. That was another bad sign. The image on the central display was grainy and broken. It had clearly been captured in a hurry, pulled from the border cruiser's external sensor array in the last seconds before transmission was cut off. Parts of it were blurred by static. Parts of it were simply missing, replaced by dark blocks where the data had been corrupted. But enough of it was there. Sarath Khan looked at the image for a long time without speaking. It was a ship. That much was certain. But it was unlike any ship he had ever seen in 40 years of naval service. It was enormous. The size comparison markers automatically generated by the sensor system showed it to be nearly twice the length of a Dominion heavy dreadnought, which was itself the largest class of vessel in the Imperial fleet. But it wasn't just the size that stopped him. It was the shape. Every spacefaring civilization the Dominion had ever encountered built ships that were smooth, curved, aerodynamic in form, even where aerodynamics meant nothing in the vacuum of space. It was simply what intelligent minds tended toward. Clean lines, elegant shapes. Ships that looked as though they belonged among the stars. This thing looked like it had been built to survive them. It was angular and hard-edged, all flat plates and sharp corners. Its hull was dark, not painted dark, but dark the way old iron gets dark after it has been through fire. Scarred, burned in places, marked with lines of damage that had been repaired and then damaged again and repaired again so many times that the repairs themselves had become part of the hull. Long, deep grooves ran along its sides, the kind of marks left by weapons that had grazed it but not killed it. There were areas where the plating had been replaced so many times that the colors didn't match, creating a patchwork look that somehow made it look more dangerous, not less. The ship was moving. Even in the still image, the sensor data showed velocity markers that made Sarath Khan's jaw tighten. It was traveling at a speed that should have been impossible for something that size, and it was heading inward, toward populated space. On the lower section of the hull, barely visible through the damage and the age and the grime of what looked like years in deep space, there were markings, and characters in some unknown script, cut deep into the metal. "Has anyone been able to read that?" Sarath Khan asked. We sent it to the Xenolinguistics Division as soon as we received the transmission, Corvan said. They're working on it now. What destroyed the cruiser? Corvan hesitated. We don't know that it was destroyed, sir. There was no explosion recorded, no debris field detected. The transmission simply stopped. The ship went silent. Sarath Khan looked at the image again. Wow, what was the cruiser's crew complement? 240, sir. Nobody in the room said anything. The xenolinguistics team worked through the night. They were a small division, mostly academics who had been folded into Imperial intelligence because the Dominion occasionally encountered ruins of dead civilizations during its expansion and needed someone to make sense of what they found. They were used to working on fragments of ancient texts, carved stones, mod data chips recovered from long-dead ships. They were not used to being woken at midnight and told to decipher something as a matter of urgent military priority. But they worked, and by the time the first pale light of dawn was beginning to show above the Velkara skyline, a senior linguist named Dessa made a discovery that made her stop completely and simply stare at her screen for several long seconds before she called her director. The script on the hull was not in any active database, as that was expected, but it wasn't entirely unknown either. Dessa had run it through every archive the Dominion possessed, including the deep archives where old, forgotten data went to collect dust. And she had found a match, a partial match. 3 characters out of what appeared to be a longer sequence. The match came from a report filed 312 years ago by a long-range exploration probe that had been sent into a region of space far beyond the Dominion's borders. A tiny satellite galaxy orbiting on the edge of the larger galactic structure that the Dominion called home. The probe had detected unusual energy signatures and had captured images of what appeared to be debris from some kind of conflict. Among the debris were fragments of hull plating. The probe had photographed the fragments before being destroyed by a piece of fast-moving wreckage. The images had been filed, archived, and entirely forgotten about for 3 centuries. The characters on those ancient hull fragments matched 3 of the characters on the ship in the border sensor image. Dessa's hands were not quite steady when she typed up her report. She cross-referenced the match 3 times before she included it. She was a careful person by nature, and she didn't want to cause a panic over a coincidence. But it wasn't a coincidence. She was sure of that. The script was too specific, too consistent. This was the same written language. Whatever had been in that satellite galaxy 300 years ago, and whatever was now moving through the outer veil at an impossible speed, came from the same place. She flagged the single segment of text that her translation algorithms had been able to partially process. 4 characters, 1 partial word, YUNSC. She didn't know what it meant. Her algorithms didn't know what it meant, but it was a name or part of one, and now it had a face. A massive, scarred, fast-moving face that had just silenced a 240-person Border Patrol cruiser without leaving a debris field. She sent her report to the Admiral's office and went to make herself a cup of something hot because she suspected it was going to be a very long day. Sarath Khan read the report twice. Then he called in his senior staff. By mid-morning, the entire upper command of the Imperial fleet was gathered in the main briefing room beneath the palace. Maps covered every wall. The grainy image of the unknown vessel was displayed at the front of the room, enlarged and enhanced as much as the original data allowed. It didn't look any less alarming at a larger size. Sarath Khan stood at the head of the table and went through everything they knew, which was not much. Unknown vessel. Unknown origin. Satellite galaxy possibly, or something connected to one. Speed and size beyond current Dominion capability. Border cruiser silenced without debris. Moving toward populated space. Rate of travel suggested it would reach the first inhabited system in the Veil Corridor in approximately 3 days. Recommendations, he said. The room gave him several. They range from immediate diplomatic contact, proposed by exactly 1 person, a young intelligence officer named Vel, who everyone else in the room visibly disagreed with, to full military interception by the largest force they could assemble in the available time. The military option won. It wasn't even close. Sarath Khan authorized the deployment of Battle Group Harris, 40 warships including 6 heavy cruisers, 12 destroyer-class vessels, and the rest a mix of combat frigates and support craft. It was a serious force, It had pacified rebellious systems before. It had destroyed pirate fleets and broken the navies of civilizations that had made the mistake of challenging the Dominion. 40 ships against one. The math seemed reasonable. The math seemed, in fact, overwhelmingly in the Dominion's favor. Fleet Admiral Harris himself took command of the group. He was a hard man, experienced and decorated, and he had the confidence of someone who had never lost a major engagement. He reviewed the sensor image of the unknown vessel with the calm assessment of a professional and concluded that while the ship was large, large ships had weaknesses: targeting systems, power distribution nodes, engine sections. Every ship had them. His weapons officers would find them. He departed within hours, his 40 ships forming up around his flagship in perfect order, the pride of the Imperial fleet cutting through space toward the outer veil. The Dominion had a very long history. 6,000 years of recorded expansion, conquest, diplomacy, and war. In that time, it had encountered 43 distinct spacefaring civilizations. Of those, 31 had been absorbed into the Empire either through negotiation or force. 9 had been destroyed when they proved too difficult to absorb and too dangerous to leave alone. 3 currently existed in a state of uneasy truce along the Dominion's borders, kept in check by the threat of the Imperial fleet. Not one of those 43 civilizations had ever made the Dominion afraid. Uncomfortable sometimes. Cautious occasionally, but not afraid. The Dominion was simply too large, too old, and too powerful to be afraid of anything it had yet encountered. That was about to change. 3 days after Battle Group Haros departed Velcara, the long-range communication network registered a brief burst of transmission from the Veil Corridor. It lasted less than 4 seconds. It was heavily fragmented. The analysts worked on it for an hour before they could reconstruct enough of it to understand what it contained. It was not a battle report from Admiral Haros. It was not a status update or a tactical assessment. It was a distress beacon, a single automated emergency signal of the type that activated when a ship's main systems were destroyed, but its emergency core was still functioning. Just one beacon out of 40 ships. Sarath Khan was in his office when they told him. Well, he did not react visibly. He had trained himself over decades not to react visibly to bad news, because a Grand Admiral who looked afraid made everyone else afraid, and afraid people made bad decisions. He sat very still and looked at the report on his desk and breathed slowly and said nothing for almost a full minute. Then he asked for the Xenolinguistics report again, the one with the 4-character fragment, UNSC. He read it again, slowly, as though there was something in it he had missed the first 2 times. There wasn't. It was the same report. 4 characters, no meaning, a connection to a satellite galaxy 3 centuries old, a ship that had just eaten 40 warships and kept moving. He set the report down. He looked at the map on his wall, the full extent of the Dominion Empire, 14,000 star systems, the greatest power this galaxy had ever seen. Then he looked at the small marker on the map that showed the last known position of the unknown vessel, still moving, still heading inward. He thought about something that the young intelligence officer Vel had said in the briefing, the one everyone had dismissed. What if they're not here to conquer? What if they're here for something else entirely? Nobody had answered that question. Nobody had thought it was worth answering. Sarath Khan was beginning to think it might have been the most important question in the room. He called for his senior staff again. When they filed in and saw his face, the room went very quiet, very fast. Because this time, for the first time in the memory of anyone present, the Grand Admiral of the Imperial fleet looked like a man who was not entirely sure what to do next. Outside, above the palace, above the towers and the lights of Velcara, the sky was clear and full of stars. Somewhere out beyond those stars, something old and scarred and very far from home was still moving, still heading inward, still, as far as anyone knew, completely unchallenged. And in the wreckage of 40 Imperial warships, somewhere in the dark of the outer veil, a single automated beacon was still blinking. One beacon, one survivor, and nobody yet knew what they had seen. Vensha had been a sensor officer for 3 years. She was 22 years old. She had joined the Imperial fleet because she was good at numbers, and her father had served, and she wanted to see more of the galaxy than the small agricultural world she had grown up on. She had expected patrol routes, border surveys, Maybe some minor piracy suppression if she was unlucky. She had not expected this. She was floating in an escape pod roughly the size of a large closet. The pod had air for 72 hours, water for 48, and a single emergency transmitter that she had already activated. Through the pod's one small porthole, she could see the debris field that had, approximately 4 hours ago, been 40 of the most powerful warships in the Dominion Empire. She was trying very hard not to look at all of it. She was not entirely succeeding. The unknown ship was still out there. She could see it through the porthole when it passed within visual range. A dark, angular shape moving slowly now, almost carefully. Among the wreckage. It was not running. It had no reason to run. It had destroyed the entire battle group in less than 20 minutes, and it was simply drifting, as if it was taking stock of what had happened, or looking for something. Vensha had her recording equipment running. She had activated it the moment the battle started because she was a sensor officer and recording things was what she did. And also because some part of her had understood very quickly that what was happening was something that needed to be recorded, even if nobody ever retrieved the pod, even if the air ran out before anyone found her. The record needed to exist, so she watched, and she recorded, and she tried to understand what she was seeing. The battle, if it could be called that, had not started the way battles usually started. Battle Group Haros had found the unknown vessel exactly where the projection said it would be, crossing the midpoint of the Veil corridor at a steady pace. The ship had been easy to detect. It wasn't hiding. It wasn't even trying to hide. It was broadcasting something. A signal on multiple frequencies repeating on a regular cycle, the same pattern over and over. The fleet's communication analysts hadn't been able to decode it in the time available, but the pattern was clearly deliberate. It was clearly meant to be heard. Admiral Haros had been unmoved by the signal. He had his orders, and his orders were to stop the vessel before it reached inhabited space. He had arranged his 40 ships in a standard intercept formation, a wide net of warships designed to cut off any possible direction of escape, and had charged his weapons. In Vensha's station on one of the cruisers, she had watched the unknown vessel on her sensor screen and noted something that she hadn't reported, because there had been no time, and also because she hadn't been sure what it meant. The unknown vessel had detected them almost immediately. Its course had not changed, its speed had not changed, and its broadcast signal, that repeating unknown pattern on multiple frequencies, had not changed either. It just kept broadcasting. Right up until the moment Admiral Haros gave the order to fire. The first salvo from 40 Dominion warships was, by any objective measure, tremendous. Plasma lances from the heavy cruisers hit the target with enough energy to melt a small moon. Mass driver rounds from the destroyer class punched through space at a fraction of the speed of light. Graviton bombs, the Dominion's most powerful conventional weapon, detonated in a spread pattern designed to shatter hull integrity across the entire length of the target vessel. All of it hit. Vensha had watched her sensors and confirmed it. Every single weapon in that first salvo had connected with the unknown ship. The unknown ship had kept moving. Not unchanged, her sensors had registered impacts, heat blooms, stress readings along the hull. The weapons had done something, but the ship had not slowed. It had not broken apart. It had not done any of the things that ships did when 40 warships hit them all at once. There had been a pause of approximately 11 seconds after the first salvo. During those 11 seconds, the broadcast signal had stopped. Then the unknown ship had responded. Vensha did not have complete footage of what happened next, because her recording equipment had been partially damaged when the ship she was on took its first hit. But she had enough. She had the sensor data, which told its own story with cold, complete numbers. She had partial visual from the external cameras before they went dark. She had audio of the bridge crew until the moment the bridge was hit, which the unknown ship had not fired in a wide spread the way the Dominion fleet had. It had not tried to hit everything at once. It had picked targets, one at a time, with a precision that was almost uncomfortable to watch on the sensor display. Heavy cruisers first, the most powerful ships in the formation, the ones that posed the greatest threat. Then the destroyer class, then the frigates, methodical, efficient, not angry, not frantic, not the firing pattern of a crew panicking under attack. It was the firing pattern of a crew doing a job. The Dominion battle group had lasted 19 minutes and 40 seconds. When the last Dominion ship went dark, the unknown vessel had stopped firing immediately. Not gradually, not winding down. Immediately. Like turning off a light switch. The gun simply stopped, and the ship continued moving at the same steady pace it had maintained throughout. And the broadcast signal came back on. The same signal. The same repeating pattern. Like nothing had happened. Ventia was watching through her porthole when the unknown ship came close enough that she could see its hull details without the aid of instruments. She pressed herself against the porthole glass like a child looking into a window, because even terrified and alone, and very possibly about to die, she was a sensor officer, and she couldn't help herself. The ship was even bigger up close than the sensor readings had suggested. It filled most of her field of view. She could see the repair work she had noted in the pre-battle briefing images. The mismatched hull plates, the old damage that had been patched over and then damaged again. There were places on the hull where she could count at least 4 distinct layers of repair work, each one overlapping the last. This ship had been through things, many things, over a long time, and every time it had been damaged, someone had fixed it and sent it back out. She was trying to figure out the scale of one of the larger repair patches. It looked like it might be older than the Dominion's current dynasty, when something happened that made her breath catch completely. A port opened in the side of the ship, not a weapons port, something else, and a voice came out of it. Not through the emergency beacon's basic receiver, through the beacon's full communication system, which meant the ship had somehow identified the beacon's frequency and targeted it specifically. The voice was speaking in an unknown language. It was a recorded message, she realized. The same few seconds of speech, repeating on a cycle, the same way the broadcast signal had been repeating. A different message, though. This one was specifically directed at her pod's frequency. They knew she was there. Then, after the unknown language message had repeated 3 times, something else came through. A face. On the tiny screen of her emergency communicator, a face appeared. She almost dropped the communicator. It was unlike any face she had ever seen. The being had 2 eyes forward-facing, in a flat face with a protruding nose structure and a wide mouth. The skin was a pale brown color, and the face had lines in it, deep ones around the eyes and mouth, and the kind of lines that came from age and tiredness and spending a long time in places that were not kind to you. The hair, which grew directly from the top of the head in a way that Ventia found deeply strange, was gray and cut short. The being looked directly at the camera. Its expression was hard to read. Ventia had spent 3 years learning to read Dominion faces, and alien facial expressions were not something she had trained for. But she spent a long time looking at that face afterward, thinking about what she had seen. Later, she would decide that the expression was tired, and sad, and careful. The expression of someone who was working very hard to make sure the next thing they did was the right thing. The being spoke. The words were unknown. But then the message shifted. A different tone, a more mechanical quality. And what came through was not words but something else. A translation attempt. Rough, it clearly assembled from the fragments of Dominion language captured from the border cruiser and the battle group communications. Broken and incomplete, but structured with an obvious deliberate effort. We speak, no more fight. We are far from untranslatable. We are lost. We want talk. We want go home. Then the face again, the same tired, careful expression, and then one more word, alone, clearly considered the most important thing to convey. Please. The transmission ended. Ventia sat in the dark of her escape pod, surrounded by the debris of 40 warships, and stared at the blank screen of her communicator for a very long time. Then she did her job. She checked her recording equipment. She confirmed that everything, every second of the battle, every sensor reading, every piece of footage she had been captured and was intact. She packaged the entire record into the highest priority transmission format the emergency beacon could produce. She added her own voice record, speaking quickly and precisely, describing what she had seen in the ordered, factual way that a sensor officer reported data. She included the face. She included the translated message. She included the word at the end. Then she transmitted everything she had back toward Velkara, knowing it would take time to arrive, knowing she might not be alive to know if anyone received it, Shakin hoping very hard that whoever eventually read her report would pay attention to all of it. Not just the part about 40 destroyed warships, all of it. Inside the UNSC Adamantine Resolve, the mood was not celebratory. Captain Alara Voss stood at the central command console of the bridge and looked at the damage report on her screen without any visible expression. Around her, the crew moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had been through worse and knew how to keep working when things were bad. The bridge of the Resolve was a practical space, everything functional, nothing decorative, every surface designed to be useful rather than impressive. It looked like what it was, the working environment of a ship that had been deployed for a very long time. "Breach in Section 7 is sealed," said the damage control officer to her left. "When hull integrity at 83% overall, Reactor 2 is showing some fluctuation, but within acceptable range. We lost 3 external sensor arrays on the port side, minor casualties in the engineering section. Nothing life-threatening." Voss listened without interrupting. When the report was finished, she nodded once. "Get me a full list of what we expended," she said. "Mac rounds, Archer missiles, everything. I want the exact count." "Yes, come Captain." She turned to her communications officer. "The pod. Did we get a response?" "No verbal response, but it's still transmitting its beacon, so whoever is in there is still alive. We received confirmation that our message was received. The beacon's frequency changed slightly after our transmission, which means the occupant adjusted it manually. They heard us." Voss nodded again. She walked to the side of the bridge where the observation windows gave a view of the space outside, where the debris field was visible, pieces of the ships they had just destroyed, tumbling slowly in the dark. She stood there for a moment and looked at it. Her senior staff watched her and said nothing. They knew her well enough to give her this moment. She had not wanted to fight. She had broadcast on every frequency they had managed to identify from the intercepted communications of the incoming fleet. She had broadcast for the entire time it took the fleet to approach, and she had kept broadcasting right up until the moment the first weapons hit. She had given them every chance she could. She had done what she always did, everything possible to avoid the fight before accepting that the fight was unavoidable. But unavoidable was still unavoidable. And here they were. She turned back to the bridge. "Navigator, where are we?" The navigator, a young man named Obi, who had been running calculations almost continuously for 2 years, pulled up the stellar map. "Best current estimate, Captain. Approximately 2.3 million light-years from home. We're in a separate galaxy from ours. Smaller than the Milky Way, but old. Very old." He paused. "The slip space anomaly that brought us here isn't something I can reproduce. I've been looking for a way back for 22 months. I don't have one yet. Are you still looking?" "Every day, Captain." "Good. Keep looking." She moved back to the center of the bridge. "Senior staff meeting in 10 minutes. We need to talk about where we go from here. Someone in this galaxy has to be willing to sit down and talk. We just have to find them." She said it simply, as a fact, the way she said most things. Not hopefully, not dramatically, just as a conclusion she had reached and was now working from. Her first officer, a tall man named Riku, who had served with her for 11 years, fell into step beside her as she moved toward the briefing room. "They outnumbered us 40-1, he said quietly. "They did," she agreed, "and they still lost." "Yes." Riku was quiet for a moment. "Do you think they'll send more?" Voss glanced at him. "I think they'll send a lot more," she said, "which is why we need to be talking to someone with authority before the next fleet arrives." She pushed open the door to the briefing room. "Because I genuinely do not want to do that again." She sat down at the head of the table and pulled up the star charts on the room's display. Outside, and in the dark of the Veil corridor, the debris continued to drift. And in a small pod somewhere in that debris, a young sensor officer with shaking hands was sending everything she had seen back to the most powerful empire in the galaxy. Sarath Khan would receive that report in approximately 18 hours. He would read it 4 times, and the word at the end, the single translated word, would stay with him longer than anything else in it. Please, not a threat, not a declaration, not the word of a conqueror, just a very tired crew, a very long way from home, asking for a chance to talk. He just wasn't sure yet if the Empire was going to give it to them. The Imperial Senate of the Dominion had not seen a session like this in 400 years. The chamber itself was built to impress. That was the honest truth of it, though no one in official Dominion history had ever written it down that way. The ceiling rose so high above the floor that the upper galleries were sometimes lost in natural mist on humid days. The seats curved in a great arc around the central speaking floor, tiered so that every senator could see every other senator, and the speaker, standing at the center, could see all of them. The walls were carved from white stone that had been quarried on a moon that no longer existed, destroyed long ago in a weapons test. The whole room said, in the language of architecture, that the people who built this and sat in these chairs were the most powerful beings in the known universe and had been for a very long time. Today, those people looked frightened. Not all of them. Fear expressed itself differently in different individuals, and there were senators in those carved stone seats who showed their fear as anger, and senators who showed it as denial, and senators who didn't show it at all, but sat very still and very pale and contributed nothing. But the fear was there. Adventure's report had been classified at the highest level, but in the Dominion Empire, as in every large political structure that had ever existed anywhere, classified information had a way of becoming widely known very quickly among the people who mattered. 40 warships gone in 20 minutes. The number moved through the chamber like a cold wind. People whispered it to each other. They wrote it on data slates and passed those slates down the rows. They said it out loud in tones ranging from disbelief to outrage to something quieter and more honest, something closer to genuine fear of what it meant. Grand Admiral Sarath Khan stood at the speaker's position in the center of the floor and delivered his report with the same steady voice he always used. He gave the facts without embellishment. He presented the sensor data, the fragments of translated communication, Vench's testimony. He showed the image of the unknown vessel, enlarged, or enhanced, displayed on the great screen behind him so that every senator in the chamber could see it in detail. The scarred hull, the mismatched plating, the markings they still could not fully translate. He answered questions for 2 hours. The questions were mostly the kind that powerful people ask when they are afraid and trying to sound like they aren't. How quickly can we replace the losses? How many ships can we mobilize in the next week? What are our largest weapons? And have we considered using them? He answered all of them honestly. Then he stood in the silence that followed and waited to see if anyone was going to ask the question he actually thought mattered. Senator Lorene Athdara asked it. Lorene was 63 years old and had been in the Senate for 31 of those years. She was thin, with sharp eyes and the kind of face that had been handsome once and was now interesting instead. Angular, watchful, deeply lined. She dressed simply for a senator, always in plain dark cloth. No ceremonial decorations except the small silver pin of her home district that she wore on her left shoulder. She was not popular in the Senate. She was, however, respected, which was different and in many ways more useful. She had read Vench's report twice before the session began. Not just the tactical summary that had been prepared for the senators, the full report, including the personal observations, and including the translated message, including the description of the face on the screen. She had read all of it, and she had thought about it carefully, and then she had come to the Senate chamber with something specific to say. She waited until the questions about fleet strength and weapons had exhausted themselves. She waited until the room had settled into the kind of silence that comes after a lot of noise, ushered to the silence where people were beginning to realize that shouting hadn't solved anything. Then she requested the speaking floor and walked down to the center of the chamber and stood where Sarath Khan had stood. "I want to talk about the signal," she said. The room shifted. A few senators looked confused. She kept going. Before Admiral Harros opened fire, the unknown vessel was broadcasting on multiple frequencies. Our own analysts confirmed this. The broadcast was repeating on a regular cycle, clearly deliberate, clearly designed to be received. We could not translate it at the time, but given what we have now learned about the fragments of this civilization's language, our xenolinguistics team has been working on it. She paused. Admiral Sarath Khan, has that translation been completed? Sarath Khan, standing to one side of the floor now, nodded slowly. It was completed this morning, he said. I was planning to include it in the supplementary report. What does it say? Another pause. Sarath Khan looked at the chamber for a moment, all those watching faces, and then he said it plainly. It says approximately, we are a vessel from a distant civilization. We have traveled a great distance and are far from home. We have no hostile intent. We would like to communicate peacefully. Please respond. The chamber was very quiet. Please respond, Lorraine repeated. She let it sit in the air for a moment. They were asking to talk. Before we fired a single shot, they were asking to talk. In fact, they were asking to talk the entire time Admiral Harris was arranging his battle formation. They kept asking, right up until the moment our weapons hit them. She looked around the chamber slowly. And then, only then, they fought back. They destroyed 40 ships, someone shouted from the upper gallery. Lorraine didn't look up toward the voice. Yes, she said. After we shot at them first. After they spent, according to the sensor data, approximately 40 minutes broadcasting a request for peaceful communication that we chose to ignore. I am not saying they are not dangerous. They clearly are. I am saying that when you look at the sequence of events honestly, which I am asking this chamber to do, the picture looks somewhat different than a simple act of aggression. The murmuring in the chamber grew louder. She raised her voice slightly. I want to ask this body a question, a serious one, not about military strength or fleet numbers, a different kind of question. She moved to the display screen and brought up the image of the adamantine resolve, the battered hull, the scars, the mismatched plating. Look at this ship. Look at it carefully. Our analysts estimate it has been traveling for a significant period. The condition of the hull, the number of repair cycles, the type of damage visible, all of it points to a vessel that has been in deep space for an extremely long time, possibly years. She turned back to the chamber. This is not a scouting vessel ahead of an invasion fleet. This is not a warship positioned at the edge of our territory as a show of strength. This is a ship that is lost. We know this because they said so, in broken, barely translated words, to the occupant of an escape pod floating in the wreckage of 40 of our vessels. They said, we are lost. We want to go home, please. The silence that followed was different from the silence before, heavier, more thoughtful. And if I'm wrong, Lorraine said more quietly now, and this is the advance force of some vast armada, then destroying this ship accomplishes nothing, because the armada knows where we are now. They know because this ship was here and fought us and was never heard from again. The message that sends is not, the Dominion is too powerful to attack. The message is, the Dominion destroys everything it encounters without asking questions first. She paused. If there is a civilization behind this vessel, one capable of building and deploying something like it, do we want them coming here with war in mind? Or would we prefer to know they came here once and left peacefully? She stepped back from the display. I am asking for a vote to suspend the military response and attempt formal communication with the unknown vessel. The vote failed. Not by a wide margin, but it failed. 41 senators to 37, with 9 abstentions. The chamber's fear was simply greater than its caution. Too many senators thought like soldiers rather than diplomats, and too many of those who might have voted differently were too afraid of the emperor to do it. Emperor Velthanos IV had not come to the Senate session in person. He was 94 years old and rarely left the inner palace anymore. But his voice had been present throughout, in the messages delivered to key senators before the session, in the whispered conversations in the corridors, in the simple fact that everyone in the room knew what he wanted. He wanted the vessel destroyed. He wanted the threat eliminated. He was not a man who had maintained power for 30 years by accommodating things he didn't understand, and a ship that had killed 40 of his warships was very high on the list of things he intended not to accommodate. 3 full battle groups were authorized, 300 ships drawn from multiple sectors converging on the Vale Corridor. the largest single military deployment the Dominion had made in 2 centuries. Lorene walked out of the chamber after the vote with Senator Velshaw, the young intelligence officer who had attended the session as an observer, at her side. They walked in silence for a moment through the wide stone corridor outside the chamber doors. "They're making a mistake," Velshaw said. "Yes," Lorene agreed. "What do we do?" Lorene looked at him sideways. He was young, 26, maybe 27, smart, careful, as to the kind of person the intelligence service attracted. People who were good at looking at information and drawing honest conclusions, even when the honest conclusion was uncomfortable. "We wait," she said, "and we make sure that when the mistake becomes obvious to everyone else, we're ready with an alternative." Velshaw was quiet for a moment. "Do you think the vessel will survive 300 ships?" Lorene thought about the image of the unknown ship, the scars, the repairs, the number of times it had clearly been through something terrible and come out the other side still moving. She thought about the message Vensha had sent, the tired face on the screen, the broken translated words, the single word at the end. "I think," she said carefully, "that whatever is on that ship has survived things we cannot imagine. I think it survived getting here somehow, which by our own navigator's assessment should be impossible. I think it survived 40 of our warships." She paused. "Whether it can survive 300, I genuinely don't know. But I know that even if it can't, even if we destroy it, we will have gained nothing, only made the situation worse." They reached the end of the corridor. Below the palace windows, Velcara went about its business, millions of lives flowing through their daily rhythms, completely unaware of what was being decided above them. "The Emperor is afraid," Velshaw said. Of course he is," Lorene said. "He has been afraid for 30 years. Fear is how he governs. The problem is that fear is a very poor strategy for this particular situation." She looked out the window at the city. "Find me everything you can about the occupant of that escape pod. The sensor officer, Vensha." Velshaw looked at her. "Why?" "Because she saw the face on the screen," Lorene said, "and she included a personal observation in her report that nobody else seems to have noticed. And because everyone was too busy counting destroyed warships." She turned away from the window. "She said the being looked sad, not aggressive, not triumphant, sad. And then it said, 'Please.'" She met Velshaw's eyes. "I want to talk to her. Before the 300 ships arrive at the Vale, I want to know exactly what she saw." Meanwhile, 300 warships were already moving. Fleet Admiral Drathvor commanded the combined battle group from his flagship, the Velcara's Judgment, and the largest warship in the Imperial fleet. It was nearly a kilometer long and carried weapons that could crack a moon. Drathvor had commanded it for 8 years, and in those 8 years it had never fired in anger, because nothing had ever required it to. He was a careful man, methodical. He had read the report on Battle Group Harris's destruction 3 times, and he had spent considerable time studying every piece of data available on the unknown vessel. Its speed, its weapons, its apparent hull strength, the way it had selected targets during the engagement. He respected what he was looking at. He did not underestimate it. But 300 ships was not 40 ships, and Drathvor was not the kind of commander who made the same mistake twice, or in this case, made the same mistake that someone else had already made once. His orders were clear. Find the vessel. Destroy it. He sat at his command station as his fleet moved through space and thought about the one detail that had bothered him since he first read the engagement report. The way the unknown ship had stopped firing the moment the last Dominion warship went dark. Immediately, like a switch. A ship fighting for survival didn't stop like that. A ship fighting for survival kept firing until it was certain every threat was gone. A ship on an attack run didn't stop like that either. A ship on an attack run pressed its advantage. A ship that didn't want to fight stopped exactly like that. He had not included this observation in any of his reports. He was a fleet admiral. His job was to follow his orders, not to analyze the psychology of alien vessels. And his orders were very clear. He looked at the star maps showing the Vale corridor and the last known position of the unknown ship. 3 days at current speed. He told himself he was ready for whatever he would find. He almost believed it. The adamantine resolve detected the incoming fleet 6 hours before it arrived. That was the advantage of being alone in a relatively quiet region of space with sensors that had been built to scan across hundreds of millions of kilometers. There was no debris left from the previous battle. The Resolve's crew had spent the days since the engagement doing what they always did after a fight, which was clean up, repair what could be repaired, and take stock of where things stood. The sensor arrays on the port side had been replaced with backup units from storage. The breach in Section 7 had been sealed properly. Reactor 2 had been tuned back into stable operation. The ship was not at full strength, but it was functional, and its sensors were very, very good. When the first long-range contact appeared on the edge of the detection range, where the watch officer noted it without alarm and began the standard process of characterizing the contact. Size, speed, heading, number of individual signatures. 3 minutes later, when the characterization was complete, she called the captain. Voss arrived on the bridge already dressed. She had a habit of sleeping in her uniform when the ship was in any kind of uncertain situation, which meant she had been sleeping in her uniform almost continuously for 2 years. She came to the sensor station. He looked at the display and studied it for a while without speaking. The contacts were still far out, but the numbers were clear enough. The computer kept updating the count as more signatures resolved out of background noise. It was past 300 and still going up. "All senior staff to the bridge," Voss said. "Now." They gathered within 5 minutes. Voss waited until they were all present and then turned to face them. And these were people she had served with for years, in some cases more than a decade. She trusted them completely. They trusted her. That trust had been built over a long time and through a lot of difficult situations, and it was part of why the Resolve's crew functioned the way they did. Quietly, efficiently, without panic, even when panic was entirely reasonable. This was a moment when panic was entirely reasonable. She told them what the sensors showed. So she told them the estimated arrival time. She told them the size of the force. She watched their faces as she spoke and saw what she expected. Not panic, but a tightening, a stillness. The look of people doing rapid calculations and not finding comfortable answers. Then she told them what she intended to do about it. There was a silence after she finished. Her first officer, Riku, spoke first. "You want to hold position?" "Yes." "And power down weapons?" "Not entirely. Stand by only. But yes." Essentially. "Against 300 ships." "Against 300 ships." Another silence. Riku looked at the sensor display, then back at her. He had a quality she valued in a first officer. He thought before he argued, and when he argued, he did it because he had a real point, not because he was afraid. "We have the MAC rounds and missiles for maybe one more engagement at the scale of the last one," he said. "Maybe. And after that, we're down to point defense and maneuvering." "I know. So if this doesn't work, we fight," she said, "and we probably lose. But we've known for a while that going home wasn't going to be easy. Dying in a fight with 300 alien warships is not outside the range of what I considered when we accepted this posting." She looked around at all of them. "What I'm not willing to do is start a fight when I don't have to. We tried talking before. They didn't let us. We're going to try again." She paused. "Any objections?" There were none. There was some unhappiness in the room, but nobody objected. They were professionals, and she was their captain. And more than that, they knew she was right. Every one of them had been thinking the same thing she had, that the last fight had not been what any of them wanted, and that doing it again on a scale 7 times larger would be something a lot of them might not walk away from. "Honey, good, me," she said. "Obi, what's your best current translation database?" The navigator, who had been quietly the second busiest person on the ship for 2 years, after Voss herself, pulled up a screen. "We recovered a significant amount of communication data from the last engagement. My language algorithms have been running continuously. I can now produce rough but functional translations in their primary language and receive their transmissions with about 60% comprehension accuracy." He paused. "It's not perfect, but it's a real conversation, not just fragments." Voss looked at him for a moment. "Good," she said again, and meant it more this time. "Prepare a broadcast. I'll write it. We'll start transmitting the moment they're within communication range." The broadcast went out 4 hours later, when the first contacts were close enough for real-time communication. It was simple. Voss had written it herself, with Obi's help on the translation, and she had gone through 6 drafts before she was satisfied. She wanted it to be clear without being weak, honest without being frightening. She wanted whoever received it to understand exactly what they were dealing with, not a vessel that was begging for mercy, and not a vessel that was threatening them, but a vessel that was making a reasonable choice and explaining why. It said, "This is the UNSC Adamantine Resolve. We know you are coming. We have detected your fleet. We are not running. We are not preparing to fire. We have powered our weapons to minimum standby level only. We are holding our position. We came to this region by accident. We are far from our home, farther than we can easily explain. And we have been searching for a way back for nearly 2 years. We have no territory here. We have no claim here. We want nothing from you except the chance to speak and, if possible, your help in finding our way home. We fought the last fleet because they fired on us first, after we had spent 40 minutes asking to communicate peacefully. We did not enjoy it. We do not want to fight again. We are one ship, one crew. We have people here who want to go home to their families. We are waiting. Please talk to us." She recorded it in her own voice. Itra and Obi ran it through the translation software, so it played in the Dominion language. Then they broadcast it on every frequency they had, repeating on a 10-minute cycle, and they held their position and waited. The ship sat still in space. The crew went to their stations and maintained readiness without engaging weapons locks. In the mess hall, people ate quietly and spoke in low voices. In engineering, the team ran continuous checks on the reactor, on making sure everything was as stable as possible. In the small medical bay, the ship's doctor inventoried supplies with the calm efficiency of someone who was preparing for possibilities they were choosing not to name out loud. In the navigation room, Obi sat at his station and ran calculations that he had been running for 22 months. He ran them because the captain had told him to keep looking, and he was the kind of person who did what he was told when the person telling him had earned his trust completely. He ran them also because the alternative, accepting that they would never find a way home, was not something he was prepared to accept. Not yet. Maybe not ever. On the bridge, Voss sat in her command chair and drank coffee and watched the contacts on her sensor display move closer. Fleet Admiral Drath Vor received the broadcast when his fleet was still 2 hours out. He was at his command station when it came through, translated imperfect in places, but clear enough in its meaning. He listened to it twice. Then he sat very still for a moment, which was something his bridge crew recognized as the Admiral doing serious thinking and knew not to interrupt. He pulled up the data on the Battle Group Harris engagement. He had read it many times before, but he looked at the specific timeline again. The broadcast that had been going out before the fight, to the 40 minutes of attempted communication that Harris had chosen to ignore, the way the firing had stopped immediately when the last Dominion ship was disabled. He put that alongside the sensor reading now coming in from the Resolve's current position. Stationary, weapons on minimum standby, exactly as the broadcast claimed. A ship that was preparing to fight 300 vessels did not power down its weapons. It charged everything it had and tried to pick the most advantageous moment to strike. It definitely did not sit still and broadcast its position and ask to talk. He called his senior staff to the briefing room, which was unusual because senior staff briefings were typically held before engagements, not 2 hours out from them. He showed them the broadcasts. He showed them the sensor readings. He asked for assessments. The assessments were mixed. His weapons officer thought it was a trick, a way of buying time perhaps, or of drawing the fleet into a specific formation. His intelligence officer thought the broadcast was genuine, but that it didn't matter, because their orders were clear. His second in command, a veteran named Korath, said nothing for a long time and then said, "Admiral, we have 300 ships and they have 1. If this is a trick, we have more than enough strength to handle whatever they do. If it's not a trick, on our end we fire anyway. We will have destroyed a vessel that was asking to talk, after they already asked to talk once before, and we sent 40 ships to shoot at them instead of answering." Korath paused. "I'm not sure which of those possibilities concerns me more." Drathvor dismissed the briefing and went back to his station. The fleet arrived at the Resolve's position and spread out in a vast encircling formation. 300 warships forming a complete sphere around the single human vessel. On every weapon system charged, every targeting computer locked and waiting. It was an overwhelming display of force. It was, by any military measurement, an arrangement of power that should have ended any thought of resistance before it began. The adamantine resolve sat in the center of the sphere and did nothing. It didn't move. It didn't charge weapons. It continued broadcasting its message on repeat, and it waited. Drathvor looked at it on his main display for a long time. When he thought about his orders, they were very clear. Find the vessel. Destroy it. He thought about the detail that had bothered him from the beginning, the way the weapons had stopped the moment the last Harris ship went dark. A switch being turned off. He thought about Korath's words in the briefing room. He thought about the word his intelligence officer had shown him, translated from the message that had been sent to the escape pod survivor. A single word, the last one in the message. That he had looked at the original recording of that communication. Something very few people had seen. He had watched the alien face on the screen, the tired eyes, the careful expression. Please. He pressed the communicator on his console. Open a channel, he said. All frequencies, translation active. He paused. And record everything. There was a brief silence on the bridge. His communications officer looked up at him for just a moment, not questioning, just noting, and then activated the system. Channel open, Admiral. Drathvor looked at the image of the single ship on his display, a battered, scarred, ancient-looking vessel surrounded by 300 of the finest warships in the Dominion. It looked, in an odd way, like a very old animal that had wandered into a place it didn't belong and was simply standing its ground with a dignity it had no right to have. He found that he did not want to fire at it. He found that, more than almost anything he could remember, he did not want to be the person who gave that order. This is Fleet Admiral Drathvor of the Imperial Dominion, he said, and his voice came out steady and careful, the way he spoke when he meant every word. I have received your transmission. I have read the record of your previous communication with our forces. He paused. I am told my orders are to destroy your vessel. He paused again. I am going to deviate from those orders in one respect. I am going to speak with you first. He waited for the transmission delay to carry his words and for the reply to come back. Tell me about yourself. Tell me where you are from. Tell me honestly what you are doing here. I am listening. The resolve was quiet for the 7 seconds it took the signal to travel and come back. Then a voice came through the channel, a human voice, translated into Dominion language by a system that had clearly been assembled with great effort from limited data. The voice was rough and tired, and something in the cadence of it, even translated, even filtered through an alien translation algorithm, carried a quality that Drathvor recognized from a lifetime of listening to soldiers. It was honesty, plain, uncomplicated honesty. The voice of someone who was simply too tired to be anything other than direct. My name is Captain Alara Voss, the voice said. We come from a galaxy called the Milky Way, in which is approximately 2.3 million light-years from here. We entered a spatial anomaly that brought us here by accident 22 months ago, and we have been looking for a way home ever since. A pause. We are a crew of 263 people. We have scientists, engineers, soldiers, a medical team, and a navigator who has not slept a full night in almost 2 years trying to find a way back. Another pause, shorter this time. We have not come here to harm anyone. We do not want your territory. We do not understand your politics, and we have no interest in your wars. We want navigational data that might help us find a slip space anomaly that leads back toward our own galaxy. And then we want to go home. The bridge of the Velkara's judgment was completely silent. I understand you have 300 warships surrounding us, Voss continued. I understand those ships have orders to destroy us. I am asking you personally to consider an alternative. A long pause. My crew has families, children, some of them. Parents waiting at home not knowing what happened to us. Her voice didn't change. It stayed steady, professional. But the weight behind the words was impossible to miss. We just want to go home, Admiral. That is the beginning and the end of it. We want to go home. The signal went quiet. Drathvor sat at his command station and said nothing for 30 seconds. Then he said, Keep the channel open. Much I'll respond shortly. He stood up. He walked to the observation window on the side of his bridge and looked out at the encircled ship. That small, scarred, stubborn shape in the middle of 300 warships, sitting perfectly still, waiting. 263 people, children back home, a navigator who hadn't slept properly in almost 2 years. He thought about his own family on Velcara, his daughter who was 14 and wanted to join the fleet when she grew up, his wife, who complained that he was never home enough. He thought about what it meant to be lost, not temporarily, not inconveniently, but genuinely, profoundly, impossibly lost. 2 million light years from home, in a galaxy you stumbled into by accident, surrounded by civilizations that kept trying to shoot at you. He went back to his station. "This is Admiral Drathvor," he said into the channel. "Captain Voss, I am going to ask my fleet to stand down from weapons-ready status. And this is not an order I have authorization to give, and I expect I will have to answer for it. But I am giving it." He paused. "I would like to continue this conversation. There are people in my government who need to hear what you just said. Mon, if you will give me your patience, and I understand that asking for patience from someone surrounded by 300 warships is a considerable request, I will do everything in my authority to ensure you receive a fair hearing." Another 7-second delay. Then Voss's voice came back, still steady, still tired, but something in it had shifted, just slightly, just enough to hear if you were listening carefully. "Thank you, Admiral," she said. "Well, we're not going anywhere." The order came from the Imperial Palace within 4 hours. Fleet Admiral Drathvor was to resume his original orders immediately. The vessel was to be destroyed. Any further delay was considered an act of insubordination, and Drathvor was informed that a relief commander was being dispatched to take his place if he refused to comply. Drathvor read the order. He set it aside on his console. Then he went back to his conversation with Captain Voss. They had been talking for 4 hours by then. A real conversation, slow because of the transmission delay and the imperfect translation, but genuine. Voss had told him about humanity, not in a formal way, not like a prepared speech, but in the way of someone answering direct questions honestly, because they had decided that honesty was the only strategy left. She had told him about Earth, about the wars humanity had fought among themselves before they reached the stars, about the wars they had fought after, about the things they had encountered in their own galaxy that had nearly destroyed them, and how they had survived them anyway. Drathvor had asked direct questions and received direct answers, and the picture that had emerged was unlike anything he had expected. Humanity was not, by his people's standards, especially large. Their territory in their own galaxy was not vast. Their population was not enormous. And their technology was advanced, but not in ways that suggested an ancient, settled civilization. It was the technology of a species that had been repeatedly pushed to its limits and had responded each time by working harder and building stronger and refusing to stop. What they had in extraordinary quantities was stubbornness and adaptability, and a very specific quality that Drathvor found difficult to name exactly. A kind of forward-looking determination that expressed itself not as aggression, but as a refusal to accept that things couldn't be made better, a refusal to give up. Not the fearlessness of something that had never known danger, but the hard-earned calm of something that had been afraid many times and had learned to work through it. He had been a soldier his whole life. He knew what real strength looked like, and this was real strength. He read the relief order again, then he put it down again. "Korath," he said. His second-in-command appeared at his side immediately. "Admiral, what's the current status of communication links with Velcara?" "Standard relay, all channels open." "Good. I want you to prepare a full transmission for Senator Lorene Athdara's office. Everything we've discussed with the resolve, the full record, unedited. Every word. Send it now, before anything else changes." Korath was quiet for a moment. "That will be viewed as going around the Emperor's office." "Yes," Drathvor said, "it will be." Korath looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded once and went to do it. Senator Lorene had not left the Senate district since the failed vote. She had set up a working space in her offices, and she had been sleeping in a chair because she didn't want to be far from her communication terminals. One of Velshaw had been with her most of that time. He had leave he hadn't taken in 2 years, and he spent it sitting across from her, working through the data they had, trying to find a path through the political situation that didn't end with 300 warships destroying something that didn't deserve to be destroyed. Vensha had come to see them on the second day. The young censor officer had been debriefed by military intelligence for 14 hours following her rescue, and she had been placed on administrative leave, not quite punishment, but clearly not trust either. While the events she had witnessed were assessed, she had been told clearly, if not explicitly, that her personal observations were not relevant to the military analysis. She had decided that they were relevant to someone else's analysis. She sat in Laureen's office and told the senator everything she had seen. Not the sensor data. That was in the report. The things that weren't in the report. The way the ship had moved after the battle, slowly, carefully, like something that was tired. The signal that had kept broadcasting even while the fleet was arranging to attack. The face on the screen. The word at the end. Laureen had listened to all of it without interrupting. When Vensha finished, the senator had sat very still for a while, and then had said quietly, "You made the right choice coming here." Now on the third day, the transmission from Admiral Drathfor arrived. Laureen read it in full. All of it, the conversation with Voss, the questions and answers, the complete record of 4 hours of talking between a Dominion fleet admiral and the captain of the most isolated vessel Laureen had ever heard of. She read it once quickly and then went back and read it again slowly, paying attention to every exchange. Then she went to the Senate. The second session was different from the first. Partly it was Drathfor's transmission. Laureen had it distributed to every senator before the session began, and the content of it changed the room in ways that were hard to define precisely but impossible to miss. A flat military report about an alien ship destroying 40 warships was one thing. 4 hours of conversation with a lost crew asking for help, finding their way home was something else entirely. Partly it was Vensha. Laureen had brought her to the session as a witness, which was unusual but not unprecedented. The young officer stood at the speaker's position and answered questions with the same precise, factual style she used when filing censor reports. But the facts she was conveying were not numbers and technical readings. She described the face on the screen. She described the broadcast that had been going out before the battle, the request to communicate that nobody had answered. She described the word at the end of the transmission, Monrin, the way she had felt sitting in that escape pod in the wreckage of 40 ships, listening to an alien voice say, "Please," through broken translation software. The chamber was quieter than Laureen had ever heard it. Partly, it had to be said, it was the Emperor's absence from this session. Velthanos had been ill. Nothing serious according to the official communications, but enough to keep him confined to the inner palace. His influence was still present in the room, in the senators who aligned with him, and in the general weight of his decades-long dominance over the political structure. But he was not there to apply direct pressure, and in his absence, the room breathed a little differently. Laureen took the floor last. She didn't make a long speech. She didn't try to be dramatic. She was 63 years old and had been a senator for 31 years, and she had learned that the most effective thing you could do in a room full of frightened, powerful people was be calm and clear and refuse to waste words. "We have a choice," she said. "We can destroy this vessel. We can do it today. Drathvor's fleet is in position, and if we relieve him and send a commander who will follow orders without thinking, it will be done before nightfall. The ship will be gone. 263 people who want to go home will be dead. And somewhere, in a galaxy we cannot reach, there are people who built that ship and sent it out. And eventually they will notice it hasn't come back, and eventually they will come looking." She paused. "We will have told them, by what we do today, what kind of people we are." She looked around the chamber. "Or we can do something we have never done in 6,000 years of Dominion history. We can let a vessel leave our territory in peace. We can give them the navigational data that might help them find their way home. When we can tell the rest of the galaxy, and whoever is waiting in that other galaxy, that when the Dominion encountered something powerful and unknown and alone, we chose to ask questions first." Another pause, longer. "That is not weakness. I want to be very clear about that. It is not weakness. It is the kind of strength that is worth having. The kind that doesn't cost you everything eventually. The vote was 44 to 39, with 5 abstentions. It was enough. The official word reached Strathmore 6 hours later. The destruction order was suspended. He was authorized, cautiously, with more conditions than he had ever seen attached to a single military authorization, to continue communications and to work toward a provisional agreement. He informed Captain Voss immediately. There was a pause after his transmission, longer than the signal delay would explain. When her voice came back, it was still professional, still composed. But Strathmore had been listening to it for days by now, and he heard the breath underneath the words. The kind of breath you let out after holding it for a very long time. "Thank you, Admiral," she said. "Tell me what you need from us." The negotiations took 3 days. They were conducted between Voss and Strathmore directly, with Lorraine's office participating through relay and Obi serving as the Resolve's primary translator and technical liaison. Where they were not simple, there were deep uncertainties on both sides, and more than once the discussion stalled on points where the cultural gap between humanity and the Dominion was simply too wide to bridge quickly. But they kept talking. That was the essential thing. They kept talking and they kept working, and every time a wall appeared, they went around it rather than through it. What they agreed to, finally, and was modest by the standards of what either side had hoped for and generous by the standards of what either side had expected. The Dominion would provide the adamantine resolve with navigational charts of this galaxy's stellar geography, information that would take Obi's calculations and give them the context they had been missing for 2 years. They would also provide an analysis of known spatial anomalies in the outer regions, at which Obi thought gave him at minimum a strong lead on where to look for a slipspace return point. In exchange, humanity's first contact with the Dominion would be recorded as peaceful, something Lorraine had insisted on because she understood the long-term importance of how this story would be told. There were things that couldn't be agreed on in 3 days. There were things that would need to be returned to by other people, in other conversations that neither Voss nor Strathmore would necessarily be part of. The shape of what humanity and the Dominion might eventually be to each other. Allies, trading partners, uneasy neighbors, something that didn't have a name yet, was not something that could be decided by one battleship captain and one fleet admiral conducting negotiations in imperfect translation software. But they had started it. That was what mattered. On the day before the Resolve was scheduled to depart, Voss made an unusual request. She asked if it was possible to speak directly, visually, face-to-face over the channel, with Strathmore and any of his staff who were willing. It was unusual. Everything about this situation was unusual. Strathmore agreed. He gathered his bridge crew around the communication screen. Most of them had never seen a human face. And they stood in a half circle, and they looked at the screen and tried to maintain the professional composure of Dominion naval officers, while their expressions said, clearly enough for anyone to read, that this was the strangest and most remarkable thing they had ever experienced. On the screen, Voss looked back at them. She was sitting at what appeared to be the command station of her bridge, and her crew was arrayed behind her in a similar arrangement. 263 people, and it felt like all crowded in to see, though of course it was only a fraction of that, as many as the camera could capture. They were all different from each other in ways that Strathmore found fascinating. Different heights, different skin colors, different ages, in different states of tidiness and uniform regulation compliance. They looked like a crew that had been through a very long expedition and had stopped worrying about the small things a while ago. They looked happy, he realized. Not joyous, too tired for that, but genuinely, quietly happy. The particular happiness of people who had been afraid for a very long time and had just been given a reason to hope. Voss's face, for the first time in all their hours of conversation, showed something other than careful professionalism. There was a smile on it. Not large, but real. "I wanted to say thank you," she said, with a face attached to it. "So it means something more than words on a channel." She paused. "And I know what you risked to make this happen, Admiral. I know it wasn't a simple choice. I know you had orders, and I know what following orders and not following orders can cost a person in a military structure." She looked directly at the camera. "You did something brave. I wanted you to know that a lot of people understand that. Drathvor didn't answer immediately. He was not accustomed to being thanked. The Dominion fleet was not a place where thanks were commonly expressed. When he found that he didn't entirely know what to do with it, he settled for honesty. "You also did something brave," he said, "sitting still while 300 ships surrounded you. Not fighting, waiting." He paused. "That is harder than fighting. I think many people in my fleet would not have been capable of it." Voss was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "We've had a lot of practice." The adamantine resolve left the following morning. It departed slowly at first, moving through the outer edge of the fleet formation as the Dominion warships cleared a path. The 300 ships held their positions in a vast spread across space. The single human vessel moved between them and out the other side, and then accelerated away into the dark. Drathvor watched it go on his main display. He watched it until it was too small to see with the naked eye and only visible on the sensor screen. He watched it until Obi's calculations, fed by the Dominion navigational data, took the resolve toward the outer regions where the anomaly data suggested a possible return point. Then it jumped, not a Dominion-style jump, not the clean, established fold of a properly mapped hyperlane. Something faster, stranger, less predictable. A bright flash of distorted space that the resolve punched through like a needle through cloth, and then it was gone. The sensors recorded a stress signature in local space that faded within seconds. Gone. 2 million light-years toward home, hopefully, or at least toward somewhere that might lead there. Carrying Obi's calculations and the navigational charts and the months of data Obi had built up, all of it now finally given the context it had been missing. The bridge of the Velkara's judgment was quiet. "Admiral," his communications officer said, "we have a response from Velkara, from the Emperor's office." Drathvor turned. "Read it." The communications officer read it. It was not a pleasant message. It detailed at length Drathvor's violations of direct orders, his insubordination in copying Senator Lorene's office with classified communications, his failure to perform his assigned mission, and his general conduct as a fleet officer over the preceding days. It informed him that he would face a formal review board upon his return to Velkara. He listened to it with the same expression he had worn throughout everything else. Steady, patient, not afraid. "Acknowledge receipt," he said. He looked at the space where the resolve had been. Then he looked at the debris field, still visible at the edge of sensor range, the remnants of the 40 ships from the first engagement. Then he looked at his bridge crew, the people who had stood beside him through this, who had watched him make choices they hadn't been sure about and had stayed with him anyway. His communications officer was watching him. "Admiral," the young officer said carefully, should we report it as a victory?" Drathvor thought about Voss's face on the screen, the tired smile, the thanks that had come with a face attached to it. He thought about 300 ships surrounding one battered vessel, and that vessel sitting still and waiting and asking with complete sincerity to be heard. He thought about what winning and losing actually meant when you took them out of the context of weapons and body counts and put them into the context of what kind of people you chose to be. "Report it as a warning," he said quietly, "to ourselves, about what we almost did." Nobody on the bridge spoke for a moment. Then Korath, standing to his left, made a low sound that might have been agreement and turned back to his station. One by one, the rest of the bridge crew did the same. Back to their consoles, back to their work, back to the ordinary business of a fleet that had just been part of something extraordinary and was now figuring out what came after. In the Senate on Velkara, Senator Lorene Athdara filed a formal record of the engagement and its resolution, and made sure it was entered into the permanent Imperial Archives in the way that all official records were. Sealed for a period, then eventually public. She made sure the record was complete. Not just the military parts, all of it. The signal before the first battle that nobody had answered. The word at the end of the message to the escape pod. The 4 hours of conversation between an admiral and a captain who were trying very hard to understand each other. She wanted it in the record because she understood something that the Emperor and the military hawks and the frightened senators did not yet fully understand. That something had happened here that was bigger than a battle or a political decision. That somewhere out in a galaxy they couldn't reach, there were people who had sent a ship so far from home that finding the way back had taken years of work and hope and refusal to give up. That when those people had been surrounded and outgunned and given every reason in the world to fight, they had chosen to sit still and wait and ask, in broken translation software, for a chance to be heard. And eventually someone had listened. She wanted that in the record because she believed, she genuinely, deeply believed, that it was going to matter. Not just now, later, years from now, decades from now, when other choices had to be made and other meetings had to happen. She wanted someone in the future to be able to look back at this moment and see what had been possible and what had been chosen. She filed the record and went to the window and looked out at Velcara, the towers and the lights in the city that never truly slept. Above it, the sky was full of stars. Among those stars, impossibly far away, 263 people were going home. She thought that was worth knowing about. She thought that was worth remembering. Somewhere in the dark between galaxies, the adamantine resolve was running hard. Captain Alara Voss sat in her command chair with a fresh cup of coffee and watched the stars move on the main screen. Different stars than the ones she had grown up watching. Different stars than the ones she had navigated by for her entire career. But stars nonetheless. The universe was full of them. That had always been for her a source of comfort rather than fear. So much of it out there. So much to find. Obi was at his station. He had not slept in 32 hours. He had the Dominion navigational chart spread across 3 screens and his own calculations on a 4th, and he was working through them with the focused, rapid energy of someone who had been given a key to a lock they had been staring at for almost 2 years. "Captain," he said without looking up. "Obi, I think I have it." He paused. The bridge went very quiet. "There's an anomaly signature about 4 months from our current position, consistent with slipspace activity, in a region the Dominion charts describe as navigationally unstable, which based on what happened to us 2 years ago is probably why we ended up here in the first place." He looked up from his screens. His eyes were red from tiredness, but the expression in them was something she hadn't seen in a long time. "If I'm reading this right, and I am fairly confident I'm reading this right, that's a door home." 4 months. After 2 years, 4 months was almost nothing. Voss looked at her navigator for a moment. Then she looked around the bridge at the crew that had been through everything with her, that had survived the wrong turn, and the 2 years of searching, and the fights they hadn't wanted, and the diplomacy they hadn't been trained for. She looked at all of them, and they looked back at her, and nobody said anything, because there wasn't anything to say that felt equal to the moment. She turned back to the front. "Set course," she said. And the adamantine resolve ran on, through the dark, toward home,